Last year I did a gaming weekend that I referred to as Dachshund Con because I have two dachshunds and they're awesome. And board games are also awesome, so you see the connection. Anyway, when the first people showed up, I took them around the collection and I did sort of a 20-30 second elevator pitch for each game to try and help them see what was available in the collection so they could help decide what they wanted to play. Unfortunately, I was getting a little hoarse by the end of that and only did it one other time, and I felt like that was a little unfair to other people and that people might want to take a look at things beforehand to decide if there was anything in particular they wanted to learn while they were here. Well, the second Dachshund Con is coming up, and I thought I'd go ahead and make a video and that other people might be interested in seeing too. So I'm going to try and go through the entire collection and talk for a few seconds about each game, why it's in the collection, whether I've learned it or not, because to be brutally honest, my urge to collect games outstrips the speed in which I'm able to learn them while appreciating games I already know. So there are several in the collection that I desperately want to learn and just haven't been able to yet. Up here we have Catacombs. Catacombs is a dexterity game that involves flicking discs. The theme is that of a dungeon crawl. It's a one versus all game, where one player plays all of the bad guys. There's sort of a dungeon master. And then the other players play heroes venturing down into the catacombs and defeating enemies by flicking them for movement or melee attack and flicking smaller discs for projectiles and spells and that sort of thing to see if they can defeat the big bad guy at the bottom of the catacombs. It's a really awesome game. Then we have three Queen games here that I have not learned how to play yet. They're all fairly recent additions to the collection. We have Amerigo by Stefan Feld, which is a exploration and economic game with a interesting rondel, which is a track of available actions that you move along that is seated using a cube tower, which is something that Queen has, that's a tower with different layers in it with holes, and you drop the cubes down and different numbers of them come out at each given time you drop cubes, and that sort of seeds actions for the board. Then we have Alhambra, which is a fairly light entry-level family game. I sort of know how to play it. I've never actually played it yet, but the base game is really quite simple, involving collecting money and then paying money for different tiles to add to your Alhambra to satisfy different scoring conditions. The reason why I have this and Fresco is that they both start out fairly simple, but each of these big boxes has a ton of expansions that you can build onto the game to make it more and more complicated. I really like that idea, and I'd really like to do a how to play video set for each one of these that starts with the base game and then has an additional video for adding each expansion. I think that would be really cool. Okay, next we have Shadows of Brimstone. Shadows of Brimstone is one of two Flying Frog games that I have, which means it's one of two Flying Frog games I'm trying to learn to like. They both have a roll and move mechanic, which I've already decided I can't stand. And I really, really, really want to like Shadows of Brimstone. I've only played it a couple times so far, and both times really frustrating. They have a variant in the box that gets rid of the roll and move, and I wonder if it's not balanced well for only two characters. I really need to give this one another chance because I really, really want to like it so much, and I took a lot of time putting together all the miniatures. Below that, we have the giant box of Mechs vs. Minions. This is one of the top games of 2016. It's a cooperative programming game using characters from the League of Legends MOBA computer game, intellectual property. Everything you've heard from other reviewers is true. It's a fantastic, ridiculous value at $85 for a gazillion miniatures and other components that are all the finest quality, including shipping. And it's also a really, really well-designed game. We're down to the last mission, and we've been having a blast. So I highly recommend it if you can get your hands on it. Over here we have my wife's copy of Clue Master Detective that I've also never played. I played a lot of Clue growing up, of course, but this Master Detective version is harder to come by. Clue was one of her favorite games growing up. We really need to play this one. I just haven't prioritized it because I prefer other games. Then we have Claustrophobia, which is a 2-player game. Really neat theme. It's kind of this city built on demonic catacombs. One player plays sort of a religious warrior, and his team of press-ganged convicts as they go down into the catacombs trying to achieve different things. And one other player plays the troglodytes, and which are nigh infinite in number, but he also can call in a much tougher demon as well. This sounds like an American-style game where you're rolling to hit and rolling to see how much damage you do. It's actually more on the European side of things. You're rolling dice to see what choices are available to you in a turn, but there's a lot of strategy in what you do with that, and there isn't as much of a chance to succeed or fail, which is nice. I've only played it a couple times, but it's really impressive. I recommend it. Excuse me. Then we have Earth Reborn, which I've had for years and still have not gotten around to playing. I've read the manual a couple times. It says 2 to 4 players. It's really a 2-player game that you could have people sit in on teams for. That's one reason why I haven't played it. It's a kind of tactical miniature combat, which is totally my sort of thing, and much less my wife's sort of thing, so it just hasn't gotten played. Behind the token holders and the coasters, we have my Mahjong set. I only know how to play kind of sort of American-style Mahjong, which is kind of more towards the rummy side of things. Sometime I'd really like to learn the true Chinese-style Mahjong. Alright. So, over here we have a lot of Rum and Bones, what I refer to as my little plastic pirates. Rum and Bones is a American-style game with a gazillion dice and little plastic pirate miniatures. It's based off of MOBA-style computer games like League of Legends, where each side, in this case opposing crews of pirate ships during a boarding action, have what would be called in the MOBA world minions or creeps, basically deckhands that advance towards each other and kind of bounce off of each other, and then heroic characters that can charge in, whittle down the opponent's creeps or minions to push them back while also getting coins for doing so, which allows them to upgrade their abilities for taking on the opponent's main characters, crew members, that sort of thing. You roll to hit, you roll for damage. There are all sorts of wild and crazy abilities. I've gone a little crazy collecting this over the past 2 years. I probably have 80 different characters, if not possibly more, between the 6 crews that I have, plus a bunch of mercenaries. The one problem with the base game is that it's the whatever time is estimated on the box is laughably off. It's probably the most off of any game in my collection. The Second Tide, which is the second season that just came out, streamlines things quite a bit. I've read through the rules. I think it's going to make for a much better game. I haven't actually gotten a chance to play with it yet. I was waiting for the upgrade kit to come, which it finally did, so that I could use my older crews with the new rules, and I haven't gotten around to playing it since it came in. Next, we have another pirate game called Merchants and Marauders. It's a sandbox-style game where you get a ship, and you get a crew, and you get a captain, and you can either take a merchant route or a marauder route. A merchant route, obviously, you're sailing around the Caribbean, trading and things. The marauder route, you're trying to sink people who are sailing around the Caribbean, trading and things. It's supposed to be a lot of fun. The expansion was out of print for a long time. It finally came back into print. I'm embarrassed to say that I've had this for about a year and I haven't learned how to play it yet. Mostly just because I worry, the times that I think of taking it out, I worry that it might be a little too confrontational for some people in the group, but I really do want to learn it. Next we have Bruges, which is a Grail game of mine, which may have just gone out of print permanently, so if you see a copy, grab it. Bruges is a Stefan Feld game. It goes up to 5 players if you have the expansion, which is even more out of print. And it's sort of an action selection game. You get cards into your hand. Each of those cards can be used, I think, 4 or 5 different ways. And so it's all about playing cards to get workers, which you can use to build houses by playing other cards, which you can then put different characters in by playing other, cards in a different way. And those characters will give you special abilities if you spend those same workers that you were using to build buildings. And of course you need money for all of this, which is another way to use cards, and another way to get points is to build oh, for heaven's sakes, canals, which is another way to use cards. It's really fun. I really like the art and the feel of the game, and it's not that heavy, which is nice. Next we have Firenze, which is another Grail game of mine. It took years to get my hands on this. I finally did at Gen Con last year. This is the best looking copy I could find, even though it has a nasty dent in the front and another one in the back. And I still haven't learned how to play it. It's another game about using cards in multiple different ways, and this one you're building towers in Florence and messing with other people's towers. Next we have Iki, again another Grail game. This was kind of a theme for this section. Iki is a Japanese game set in a traditional Japanese medieval market, and it's a rondel game. So again, as I sort of mentioned earlier, with Amerigo you have a circular track. You can only move one way around that track, and you're choosing where to stop as you move along to take different actions. In this case, you're moving around the market in only one direction, choosing how many stops you want to take along the way, and you're installing your own vendors in the market to add actions that are beneficial to you. They level up when other people use them, and you derive more benefit that way. Eventually they're going to retire, which gives you other benefits. And periodically fire attempts to rush through the market, which was very common in medieval Japan because of all the wood. It's really neat, and I lived in Japan for 2 years in an old medieval castle town, so it's kind of near and dear to my heart because of that. If you can find it, I would definitely check it out. If you get the first English printing, the manual is awful. The second English printing, which is what this is, has a much better manual. You can also get that on Board Game Geek for free, so download that. Next we have Panthelos by Iron Games. This is a dice placement, worker placement game. It's a worker placement game. This whole section is worker placement games, and in this one you're placing dice, but you're not rolling them. You're just using the different sides to indicate the level of knowledge and ability of the worker. This is kind of neat because while in a lot of ways it's a pretty traditional Euro-style worker placement game, there's also this periodic attacks on the city mechanic, which if you've played Champions of Midgard, which I'll get to later, is very similar to that, but if you keep allowing the Titans to damage the city unhindered, and you can even advance this further on your own, you can actually cause the city to be destroyed before the end of the game, which changes the way the end game is scored, and depending on what strategy you are following, could really hurt you or your opponents if they were banking on the city surviving to the end of the game. So that's a really interesting aspect. Okay, next, these are all worker placement games. We have the Manhattan Project, which is a worker placement game about building atomic bombs. Not dropping them on people, although you can use conventional bombs to bomb your opponents. This is a really neat game because it has a central worker placement board, but also you can build buildings on your own personal worker placement board that are better than the ones in the middle. And you can use espionage to actually go to your opponent's buildings and gum up their works and that sort of thing. I'm not wild about the components on this one because everything is cardboard, including the workers. It just feels very flat. But it's otherwise quite neat. Next we have Energy Empire, which is sort of an energy generation game set in the same universe, which is weird because it's our universe. Anyway, this is supposed to be awesome. I just got it. I haven't learned how to play it yet. The workers are, again, thick cardboard, which makes me sad, but they're at least dice, so it feels like there's a little bit of height to it on the table. We have Russian Railroads, which is hard to get right now because it's between printings. It's a railroad theme game, but it's not a railroad game. Railroad games tend to be about route building and pick up and deliver and that sort of thing. This is actually a worker placement game with a little bit of a vague theme associated with railroads. It looks really, really cool. I haven't gotten a chance to play it yet. Below that we have New Bedford, which is a worker placement game about the whaling industry. It has a lot of neat little bits and the tiniest little meeples you ever did see, as well as pieces for hardtack and all sorts of stuff like that. This is a very unusual worker placement game in that you provision a ship and then you send it out, and over a period of turns it comes back to you collecting whales, and when it gets to port, you have to have the resources to pay for those whales. If you don't, they go on the market and other players can buy them right out from under you, and the whales are where the points are. I struggled to sort of figure that out strategically, and the first time I played it, I haven't been back yet. But it's a neat production. My only complaint, which has been mentioned by other reviewers, is that if you get the expansion, which you really should, because they kind of split off a portion of the base game and call that an expansion, it doesn't fit into the base game's box, and both of these boxes are really awkward size. It's lame. Next, we have another rail game. This is Carson City. This is really hard to get in the US unless you buy it from one of the companies that imports it. It's one of 2 American West games in my collection created by Europeans. This is a worker placement game as well. Like I said, this whole section is worker placement games, where you're sending cowboys to different parts of the developing Carson City to collect resources. You're also building and taking over buildings in the town. You can have shootouts with other players, that sort of thing. Haven't learned how to play it yet. I know. We have Warhammer Quest, the adventure card game, which is supposed to be quite good. I was really excited to get my hands on it, and then I found out that Fantasy Flight and Games Workshop were going their separate ways, and there was never going to be any more of it. And that made me sad, and I haven't learned how to play it yet. Also, I really wanted the extra character expansions that were really cheap until they sold out and everybody found out that there weren't going to be any more, and now they're obscenely overpriced, so that's probably never going to happen. Next, we have Railways of the World. This is an actual railroad game. Really excited to learn how to play this. Fairly recent edition, haven't learned how to yet. Then we have Scythe. Scythe was another one of the big games from 2016. This is an economics game with some combat, sort of action selection, with deterministic, that is not randomized combat. It's set in a really neat alternate post-World War I Eastern Europe with sort of steampunk mechs. Its reputation, I feel, is very much deserved. It's well worth playing. You should definitely check it out. Next we have Terraforming Mars, another one of the big games from last year. This is an up to 5-player drafting game, sort of. You're playing cards and working together to terraform the planet Mars. which determines when the game is done, and you get points for advancing the terraforming, but it is actually a competitive game. You're each trying to do a better job. This one's a lot of fun. It has some component issues in the base game, but you can get aftermarket